recording to the cloud.
And as we're waiting to get started, if you wanted to introduce yourself in the chat, just send a quick message of your name and what organization you're with, what your role is. Just, we have an intimate group today, so we can introduce ourselves in the chat as we get started.
So Joni, I'll just go through the quick intro. If you could just advance the slide, please. So again, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is on job development, building skills to connect with the business community. And this is session 1, part of a series. And this one is approaching employers and introducing yourself in your employment services. Next slide, please. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, and we're housed at Rutgers in the School of Health Professions in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. My name is Gati, and I'm the project coordinator of the center, and will be facilitating this webinar today along with Joni Dolce. Next slide, please. So the MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices to individuals with mental illnesses. We ask that you visit our MHTTC network website for additional information at mhttcnetwork.org. And also on your screen, you'll see our bit.ly link. If you're interested in staying up to date with the events and products that the Northeast and Caribbean MHTTC is providing, we ask you to sign up to receive our email communications, and you can do so by using that bit.ly link that you see on the screen. Next slide, please. Following the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey, and we value this feedback and use it to use this feedback to improve our activities and inform our future activities. And the surveys are also important because our funding is linked to the completion of these surveys, so we thank you in advance for completing them. Next slide, please. Again, I just want to mention that only the didactic portion of this Zoom meeting webinar will be recorded and posted on our website. We will have some breakout sessions, and those will not be recorded. Next slide. This presentation was prepared for the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. All material appearing in this presentation, except that they're taken directly from copyrighted sources, is in the public domain and may be reproduced or copied without permission from SAMHSA or the authors. Citation of the source is appreciated. We ask that you not reproduce or distribute this presentation for a fee without specific written authorization from the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. At the time of this presentation, Marian Delphin-Brittman served as Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use at SAMHSA. The opinions expressed herein are that of the presenters and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services or SAMHSA. No official support or endorsement of DHHS SAMHSA for the opinions described in this presentation is intended or should be inferred. So we encourage you to interact with us during this webinar that's being hosted in the meeting format. You can use the chat to share your questions and answers. Joni will be providing us with the didactic portion of this webinar. So, please share any questions and answers then. I will be enabling your microphones during the time of our breakout sessions. You can also share during any questions or answers that you have in the chat. And just to let you know, also you can control who sees your comments. You can chat with one another, or you can also, share your ideas in the main chat room. Next slide, please. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented languages in all of its activities. And this includes language that is strength-based and hopeful, language that is inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences. This is language that is healing-centered and trauma-responsive, invites individuals to participate in their own recovery journey, language that is person first and free of labels, non-judgmental and avoids assumptions, language that is respectful, clear, and understandable, and consistent with their actions, policies, and products. Next slide, please. So we have with us Joni Dolce. Joni is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. Joni has several years of experience working in behavioral healthcare settings, namely supported employment, and Joni teaches courses in the department's undergraduate program, as well as providing training and technical assistance to behavioral healthcare providers. Her research interests include staff training and employment services, and she presents nationally on the topic of employment services and is listed as a Society for Human Resource Management recommended speaker on the topic of creating workplaces that support mental health. So now I will turn it over to Joni, and please feel free to message me if you have any questions or comments as we go along. Welcome everyone again.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for putting into the chat your name and where you're from. It looks like we have a lot of employment specialists, a lot of job developers. I saw mostly people from our Northeast region, but I might have missed some people outside of the region, but welcome. So as Kati mentioned, we are going to get started looking at approaching employers. And this is part one of the three-part series on job development. The next two sessions will focus on marketing and developing and maintaining relationships with employers. But for today, I thought we could really dig deep into creating an elevator speech, developing an approach to employers, identifying how to respond to tough questions that employers might ask during that initial meeting. So today we're really focusing on that introduction, that initial meeting that you have with an employer. As an employment specialist from years ago and working in supported employment for many years and now training in supported employment, I know that is often the most difficult part of our jobs, is interacting with the business community and feeling confident and feeling that we are presenting ourselves in a professional way. I know for me anyway, that was always a difficult thing. But as you get to practice it more and you get more familiar with it, you do feel more confident and it becomes an enjoyable part of the job. So we're going to talk a little bit about job development just to kind of orient ourselves to the entire series. But when we think about job development, we're really looking at the whole process, meaning we're looking at initiating contacts, we're looking at maintaining contacts and these ongoing relationships with employers. And we're talking about employers from a variety of different businesses and industries. As part of job development, we're also assessing the employer's needs. We're assessing what businesses are looking for. We're really looking for opportunities that will be a good job match with job seekers that we're working with. Job development is tough. There's been a little bit of research on job development, and most of that research really looks at the time intensity that job development is. It's very labor intensive. You can have 1,255 job leads, one researcher found, resulting in approximately 180 interviews, and those interviews resulting in about 27 job offers. So as that shows, job development can be a very labor intensive part of our jobs. And maybe if you want to just kind of write in the chat some of the difficulties or challenges you may have had in terms of job development. But when we talk about job development, we're really looking at our role as employment specialists, vocational counselors, and our interactions with the business community. Certainly, we want to encourage job seekers that we're working with to job search on their own and meet with employers on their own, and also develop their own network of employers and businesses. But we also know that in supported employment, job development is one of the critical principles of the IPS, the individual placement and support model. And services that provide job development have really been found to be more effective than those services who do not. There's been a little bit of research looking at individuals with mental health conditions in supported employment had a much better chance of getting a job when an employment specialist did job development as part of their job roles. And that job development was done in addition to the support that you provide to job seekers that you're working with. So this idea of approaching employers and making this initial contact is really part of your networking. And as if you attend the remaining 2 sessions, we're really going to get into marketing and developing a marketing plan. And part of that marketing will include networking. But I just wanted to share a little bit of research and see what your thoughts were and your responses. So in a survey conducted by LinkedIn, we all know what LinkedIn is. What's the percentage of people getting jobs through networking? So out of all 5 of these percentages, is it 55, 40, 35, 85, or 75? Use your chat and just pop it in the chat and let me know, and we'll have a discussion about it. And you can read the entire survey at the bottom. There's a link there, it gives you some additional information. So we have some people saying 55, 55, 75, 55. Crystal says 85, 75, 75. It's actually 85%. So in this study conducted by LinkedIn, they found that 85% of people get jobs through networking. And that networking includes, in supported employment, job seekers out there meeting with employers on their own and networking through their own networks, and as employment specialists, teaching job seekers how to network. But in addition to that, it's also looking at when we think about job development in SE services or any other vocational service, we're really looking at our role in getting out there and developing your network of employers and businesses and others in the labor market. So most people get jobs through networking. Think about past jobs that you've had. Maybe you can kind of, again, use the chat and just write in, have you gotten most of your jobs through networking? Yes or no? Let's see. Yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no. Actually, no. Yes, yes. So it looks like the majority, just in this quick little poll we're doing here, have gotten their jobs through networking, but a fair amount of people have also not gotten it through networking. But it's an important skill to learn in employment services and in the behavioral health field. Oftentimes, those sort of more marketing and sales type job roles or job responsibilities may not be something that we initially were inclined to when we entered this field. The helping professions, we might have landed into the role of job developer or into the role of a vocational specialist. And as part of that role, really interacting with the business community is critical. So we're just talking about this top goal of introducing yourself in your employment services today. And in this goal of introducing yourself, we really want to have an elevator speech prepared, and it's just a way of introducing yourself. And we want to be able to prepare some tough questions that an employer might ask. Each goal or each interaction that you have with an employer or the business community, you should be thinking about what that goal is. Is the goal simply to introduce yourself? Is the goal to gain a better understanding of the employer's needs? And that is what we'll discuss in the remaining 2 sessions, how to really get a better understanding of what the employer's needs are. But for today, we're really looking at approaching employers, introducing yourself, having a professional introduction that you can use, and also preparing for those tough questions that an employer might ask. I just left the other information on here because I think it's helpful for you to have. And again, in preparation for our future sessions, we'll be discussing that a little bit more. But for now, I think that we're going to get started into describing what an elevator speech is. Does anyone know what an elevator speech is, or do you have one already created that you might be using in your employment services, or even if you have one that you use for your own personal? Okay, looks like we have something. Wendy, yes. LOL, I don't have one handy. Okay, so having it handy is also very important. I think having something in place so that when you're out networking, you could be networking at a business event, you could be networking at your kid's soccer game or whatever it might be, but having that elevator speech ready so that you're kind of always out there thinking about employment opportunities and identifying employers that might be a good match for individuals that you work with. But what an elevator speech is really just this brief overview or brief synopsis of the services that you provide. We're looking at the elevator speech in this context really about the employment services. Again, you can have your own professional elevator speech that you might use when you're job searching or in your own career development. But right now, we're really talking about how it's used when we're introducing ourselves to employers or the business community. It really is max 1 minute. It's supposed to be the span of an elevator trip. So think about it as a very brief, quick kind of overview of what you provide. And there are some key ingredients to an elevator speech that we'll go over and you'll have a chance to practice. But it really is used to pique an employer's interest. It gives that employer a quick overview of why they may want to work with you and the services that you provide. It's used a lot in networking when you're making that initial contact with an employer. It's also good after if you're in person, have business cards or a brochure possibly available if you have that in your marketing budget to be able to present to the employer after you kind of introduce yourself, give them that small takeaway. You may also want to add on that takeaway, whether it's a card, maybe a portion of your elevator speech. And as we get into the ingredients, you'll see what I mean. A portion of that elevator speech as almost a tagline, so that when the employer goes back and they look at your business card, they can kind of remember. That's the key of an elevator speech, is make it somewhat memorable. It doesn't have to be hokey, or it doesn't have to be kitschy, just something that is more memorable and something that the employer is likely to think of when they might have a need that your service can address. Very simple ingredients, and I I worked with a colleague of mine, Faith McCullough, years ago, and we presented on this topic, and this is information that was from that original presentation, also from an entrepreneur from the Russmore Group. We had gotten some information, but you can also Google elevator speeches and come up with lots of really creative, interesting ways to present that. But these are really the basic 4 ingredients. You want to introduce yourself, so your name, your organization. Think of a problem that the employer has. So in the chat, jot down some problems that you think an employer might have based on kind of the most recent pandemic related problems, or even problems in general, but think about problems that employers typically have. Okay. Attendance issues, employee retention, absolutely. Right now, there's a labor shortage. Yes, so right now there's a lot of the great resignation is going on. So there's a labor shortage. I think I just missed one. Budget, not being able to hire or keep employees, the payroll might be something. So there are problems and concerns that employers have. Now think about how you might, in the services that you offer, might be able to help the employer solve this problem. And this is when in our breakout groups, you'll have a lot of time to talk with one another about what those problems are. Those problems are unique to your service, unique to your region of the country. They might look very different on the West Coast, middle states, and the Northeast. So think about how you can help that employer solve the problem. So think of some ways that your services could be viewed by an employer as a positive or something of great benefit. Okay, let's see in the chat. Mike writes, educating the employer about the SE employee pool that the employer has not been accessing. Yes, so there's a pool of resources and individuals that the employer may not have been accessing, and creating that opportunity to educate. And now you want to offer a benefit to the employer. So you want to close it out with, well, what's in it for them? And that's what you want to really pay attention to when you're creating your elevator speech or this introduction. You really want it to convey to the employer that you're being mindful of their needs. It really is you helping them address a problem that they might have. So an example of an elevator speech might look like, well, I'm going to hold off on the example. I want you all to come up with those examples in your breakout rooms, and Kati and I will pop in and out of the breakout rooms to really help and support you to leave with an elevator speech that you've crafted. Helene writes, the work opportunity tax credit is also another benefit. Financial hiring incentive information, sensitivity training, Doreen mentions, are other ways that we can help the employer solve the problem, and also a benefit to the employer. So think about how your solution to the problem that you've identified that employers have can be a benefit to the employer. So we are going to start, and I do have an example, but I want you all to spend some time thinking through in your breakout groups and leaving with this brief introduction that you can begin using. So here it is in kind of the, again, hello, my name is Joni Dolce. I'm with II Employment Services, or whatever the name of your organization is, describing a problem or concern that the employer has, how you can help solve the problem, what are the benefits to the employer. And remember to use business language, and stay away from kind of jargon that's only in your organization. We have a little bit of an exercise later on to sort of look at business versus human service language and the difference. But when you're creating your speech, really pay attention to the language that you're using, and others in the group also kind of nudge your partners and your other group members if they begin to use jargon that may only be known in our fields. So we have 22 people. So I think we can break up into, let's say,
We're recording.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So we'll spend a couple of minutes reviewing some of the elevator speeches that you developed. I know I was in one of the rooms. I think Mike was saying that this was timely. He was either going or had just gone to an event, an employer-wide event, that an elevator speech could have been very useful. So why don't we go through, and I'll ask for some volunteers. You can unmute your mic, or Kati can unmute your mic if you raise your hand, or yes, thank you. Yep. So if Kati's asking everyone to please raise your hand so that she can enable your microphone. But I'd love to hear a couple and see how it worked out. Mike, are you willing to share what your group came up with?
Cross unmuted each other. Yeah, I have to give a presentation on Thursday morning to the Atlantic City Chamber of Commerce. So it's kind of an elevator speech, but it's going to be in a big room. But it's the same idea. And then we have an opportunity to go beyond that and give a presentation maybe a little. But as far as this goes, it would just be hello, my name's Mike O'Brien, and I work for Jewish Family Service. We're well aware that there is a labor shortage right now, and being able to hire and retain people is a major problem for you. And we want to let you know about a pool of applicants that I know is underserved and under-accessed, which are people with disabilities. Depending on how much time I have there, I'd be like hitting them with the research you have on why, retention and people who don't quit and all that kind of stuff. And that would be the benefits to the employer. And Rebecca had mentioned one I hadn't thought of, which we use, but I hadn't thought of for my presentation, was that just reminding them that job coaches come along, which would take the pressure off them for continued training, especially if there's training that needs to go on a little bit longer than might be usual.
So there's some ongoing employee assistance,
yes,
ongoing support. So we want to make sure we're really focusing on our business language,
yes, retention, no absenteeism.
Yes. Yep.
The tax credit is a beautiful. We have that set up on the side, and because they're business people, so I want to start with the things that are more bottom line. That was my thought, and that's why I think this is great that I have this particular topic today. That if anybody has any kind of critique about that or additions, I'd really love to hear them.
Any thoughts on Mike's elevator speech? I'll give a couple of initial thoughts, very brief. I think it was a kind of within that 60s with 30 to 60 minute or second time frames, which I thought was really good. Others, any thoughts on the problem that Mike identified in his speech? Or how they can solve the problem and the benefits offered?
Give me more ammunition, a few more,
yes,
maybe some more benefits.
I think it was good because I was also in my elevator speech. I can't even speak either. My pitch that I was mentioning the retention rate, the having an employee for a long term, because I service veterans, and that's a big thing that we're looking for, is for them to have a long term employment. So that was something I covered as well, which I think is huge right now because so many jobs are having a lot of turnaround. So I think that was actually good that you mentioned that, because people are looking for those loyal, will work here for 10-year employees.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Other feedback for Mike?
Yeah, I think that in my experience, I like to not try to make everything sound too golden, to acknowledge that problems will in fact come up. But the benefit of that is that, here you have an employment specialist that's going to help the employer and the person meet their goals. But, they all know not to sugarcoat it.
Yeah, you don't want to overpromise. You don't want to promise things that that you're not able to deliver. But some of the areas that you can provide solutions are helping better understand what an employer's needs are, right? So that's part of what we do in our field, is we aren't just going in asking, are you hiring? We're going in and are after this initial introduction, the goal is to be invited back to get some more information, or the goal is to have an opportunity to go back and really hear what the employer's needs are. So that's something that is a solution to many of the problems that you're identifying. You, in your services, take the time to assess the employer's needs, get a better understanding of what they look for in job candidates, as well as job seekers that you're working with. You also do a fair bit of goal planning.
Well, no, but that's a benefit of teams. People still familiar, even though you
Yeah.
have.
So I'd like to also say that, that you're a resource for them, and that, you are going to try to help make a good job match. Once you know the perfect candidate, what they're looking for, and I wouldn't say perfect, what they're looking for in a good candidate,
Yep.
but once you know that, you could say to them, I'm going to try to, bring you some good candidates. And I always kind of feel like a working interview sometimes is good for certain populations as well. People that don't interview well, and they have the skill, a working interview where they can actually show what they can do, I think sometimes really is beneficial as well.
Yes.
But
Any-
just letting them know that you're there as a resource,
As a resource.
and you'd like to have a long-term relationship with them, that you really want to have a long-standing relationship, and that you're there to help them solve problems.
Yes. Yep. And that one benefit to the employer is helping with retention, like you're all mentioning, saving time, because you're kind of acting as that liaison between qualified candidates and someone to match what they're looking for in the job. Saving money through, advertising, all of those benefits to an employer are accurate. I mean, in your work, you work very hard to help job seekers look at their interests, look at their values, look at their skills, and you're going to attempt to match those skills to positions that are out in the community. So absolutely. So anybody else before we move on to talking about some tough questions that an employer might ask you during this initial meeting? Because I'm just thinking of Mike's elevator speech and some of the things Mike mentioned. I work with some people with disabilities. So you can imagine some of the tough questions that might develop from that, and being prepared and familiar and confident of how you're going to describe that is really key. So that's great. Just a show in the chat, did people come away with a usable elevator speech? Yeah, raise your hands or put in the chat, yes or no. And my email is going to be here at the end, so feel free to email me if you wanted to even share with me your elevator speech, and we can, I can offer some feedback. We have a small enough group to be able to do that. So yes, it looks like people kind of left with that. Sean had one already, great. So we're going to move on into this idea of, just as you are presenting your elevator speech and you're approaching employers, you want to make sure you're presenting in a very professional way. You're presenting in a way that the business that you're interacting with sees you as somebody, as part of their business community, not a behavioral health organization or a human service organization. You don't really want the employer to see what you're doing as sort of this charitable reason. Like Mike said, there's research, there's real solid rationale for hiring people and having that information. But you also want to go in with this idea of a positive attitude and confidence, and respecting the employer's time, and really knowing that a business owner or hiring manager may only have a few seconds. They may only have that 60 seconds that your elevator speech is going to take up. So making sure that you're respecting their time. And if they don't have the opportunity right then and there to meet with you and talk about what their needs are, always follow up with, may I give you a call next week? Or what's your schedule like next week? I can make some time and meet with you further, and we can discuss what some of your current hiring needs are, what some of the challenges you're currently encountering, and how our service might be able to help with those. But really respecting that time. And then we're going to talk about this idea of language versus human service and business language. So coming from a rehabilitation field, competitive employment, we might say, what would be a more business-like term for that? You can just use the chat or think through it. Work or job. So, we are so stuck sometimes in our own fields and our own jargon. Even the term competitive employment to an employer might seem extremely an odd term to use. We might say consumer or client. Client might be more applicable, but we also want to see. Applicant. I'm working with job candidates. I'm working with applicants who are interested. So really making sure you're matching that industry. Counsel, maybe you wouldn't necessarily say counsel, but think about, we have staff available. We have people in our organization or our services who can meet with and negotiate and help provide those ongoing employee assistance that might be needed. Job development, going out there saying, I'm doing some job development today. Again, an employer has no idea what that is. Part of my job here in my employment services is to go out here and do some marketing and some, maybe you don't want to say selling, that might be a little too harsh, but the message is you want to convey that you're not coming from this just human service field.
How about help with recruitment?
Help with recruitment, absolutely.
Because that's a term that they always use.
Recruitment, retention, ongoing supports. That's another thing. Well, we offer ongoing supports through our services. Well, an employer doesn't really know what that means. Long-term employee assistance, that they might resonate more with, or retention. And then finally intake, just being careful. It's the application process when you're talking about employment. Let's see. Wendy, I've had employers ask what the cost is. Well, we're getting to that right now. That's so interesting that you brought that up, but we're going to get into some of these tough questions that employers might ask, and how are we going to respond to those? And one of those tough questions is, why is there no cost? What's the cost for your services? So I am going to forego the breakout sessions because we have about 15 minutes left, but I really want us to respond to these. So please use the chat and we'll just kind of, as a larger group, respond to some of these questions. So I'm going to pose a few questions that are toughies that when I was doing job development and continue when I'm training people in the community to do job development, we're presented with, and sometimes they're kind of hard in that moment to think through and think about. So this is an opportunity for us to spend that time. So what would you do if the manager says they're not hiring? So you go in, and even if you're not asking for jobs, because you never want to go in and say, are you hiring? Because then the employer is going to either say yes, and that would be a good thing, but more likely they might say no or yes, but you have to fill out the online application. So if you walk in and the receptionist or the other, or somebody kind of in that front area is saying, oh, they're not hiring, or the manager says they're not hiring, what can you say to sort of continue to develop that relationship? Remember, we want to develop relationships with employers. So we don't really want to just say, okay, thank you, bye. What is it that would be helpful in this situation? Okay, I'm seeing some in the chat. When will you be hiring? Never say free. Doreen mentions, yes, that's true. Can I leave my contact information for when a position becomes available? That's a good one too. Leave my contact and still attempt to meet with them for a brief session. Absolutely. Crystal writes in the chat. So you might want to say and explain to them elevator speech followed by contact or request for a meeting. Mike says you might want to explain to the person, I'm not there today right now to solicit job leads, but I really wanted to introduce myself, and I wanted to introduce our employment services. We're both part of the community, and I really want you to know what types of services we provide. My intent is to really gain a better understanding of what you look for in a job candidate, and a strength of our service is that we gather a lot of information about what the employers are looking for and your needs so that we can make a good job match. And you might say, I know that right now, remember, we're respecting their time. Right now might not be a good opportunity to meet, but I would love to be able to follow up with you in the future to really get a better understanding of what you look for when you're hiring. So again, do you see the difference? You're kind of not asking if they're hiring. It's not for you and the job seekers you work with. You're really trying to send that message. I'm not here to solicit jobs. I really want to find out what your needs are so that in the future, I might be able to better connect job seekers I'm working with who are going to be a good fit. Kelly writes, or Wendy writes, identify yourself as a job developer, matching job seekers with employers, explain the services we provide and leave my contact information, as ask if it would be okay to follow up in the future. Absolutely, Kelly. And even in addition to that, kind of provide a date. You know, if it would be okay, I'd like to follow up with you in a week, or you know, please let me know when a good time of the day might be for us to have a brief meeting. You don't want to be too insistent, but you also want to try to, again, develop that relationship with the employer. So let's look at, again, these are just kind of giving you some hints, not there to solicit jobs, gaining a better understanding, making a good job match. So the receptionist says, the hiring manager is not available. What might you do in this situation? Okay. Ask for contact, get their contact information. Yes, may I have their name and number? I'd like to follow up with them. Also ask for that person, whether it's the receptionist or someone in that sort of, you know, gatekeeping role, whatever that might be. Anne mentions, ask if there is a better time. Absolutely. Ask that person for their name as well, so that when you do reach out to the hiring manager, whether it's by phone or email, you could even say, oh, I spoke with so-and-so at the front desk, and they had mentioned giving you a call at this time would be possible. You know, you might want to ask the person at the front desk, you know, would you mind if I copied you on the email, or let them know that you gave me their information. But any way that you can sort of turn a cold call into a warmish type call is your best bet. Daleen mentions get their contact and leave a business card for follow-up, but you also follow up as well. I've learned that leaving my business card isn't always the most effective way. They might forget about it. They may not remember you, but calling or sending an email. And as the second two sessions, when we talk about marketing, we're really going to talk about how to market and use social media. And then also in that final session, developing and maintaining relationships, we're going to even talk about those strategies even more. So I would really recommend, if you're able to attend those, please. Sean mentions, I like to email first and try to set up a best time for them. Yep. So sending that email first, but these initial meetings oftentimes are what gives you the person's name, gives you a sense of like the work culture if you're going in person. So sometimes, even though it's a cold call and they're not always the most effective, going out initially to just get a sense of that employer and the business and get their name and number is sometimes a valuable way to spend some time in the community. The manager asks why there's no fee for services. How would you respond to that? And this is where you really want to stay away from disability related or human service language. So just be careful of how you respond to that. Anybody want to take a stab in the chat of what might be a response to this? Let's see. We're a grant-funded program that allows us to provide services such as this. Yep, you know, I would imagine employers are very familiar with different grants that are going on now in light of the pandemic. Even if that's not necessarily part of what your grant funding is through, the term grant is may be more familiar to employers nowadays. Client fees. So in a sense, many of the people that you work for, the individuals participating in services, essentially are purchasing these, whether it's through their insurance or other services, nonprofit, grant funded. Let's see, we have grants to give us the ability. We're federal and state funded through the Rehab Services Administration. So the Rehab Services Administration or Department of Labor, those are particularly the DOL, that's really a mainstream type of employment service. So think about ways that you can present this. And I think someone, it might have been Wendy, mentioned making sure you're not really describing it as free. If when you go in and you're really emphasizing the free aspect of it, an employer might feel concerned, like, oh, well, why is it free? Is it not as good as these other services? So this really is something that's going to take some thought and practice. And all of these, I would encourage you to practice with colleagues and your supervisor, because you want it to come out really confidently. So you want to stay away from that disability and human service language. And then finally, or you're asked why you're there instead of the job seeker. And you might want to say something along the lines of, part of your job duties includes meeting with local employers to get an idea of what they look for in candidates so that you can make a good job match, or some variation of that. What if the manager says, oh, I've worked with agencies like this in the past and hasn't really been that good for me. You want to acknowledge that employer's experience, but you also want to emphasize that you attempt to provide job candidates who meet the skills and interests and needs of an employer. However, you do recognize that sometimes a job candidate may not work out, and that your bad experience that you may have had in the past may not generalize to all services, but I recognize and I'm acknowledging that you did have this bad experience. So you don't want to say, oh, that won't happen with people I'm working with. You want to acknowledge that those experiences have happened. Our agency seeks connections with the community to better understand the needs of employers in the area. Perfect, beautiful. So as we wrap up, these are just what we went over, but I just put them in kind of a table form so that you could even print these out or have these somewhere handy to use when you're out there job developing and meeting with employers. The slides will be downloaded, yes. Think about now with COVID and the pandemic, there might be some more questions about safety and remote work capability. So just be prepared for those. Remember to get the contact information, thank them for their time. This idea of taking notes and logging contacts. Once I started doing that and I was able to really see who I've met with, who the person's name, all of their information. And then I would have some columns that identified follow-up needed. And it would say, Jane said to call back in 2 weeks, and I would make sure that I called that employer back when they said that they were wanting me to get in touch with them, and leave with something. And this idea of even another contact. So you might say, oh, I understand that your company here in Camden County may not be hiring. However, I have a colleague in Burlington County. Do you have a contact person of the Pep Boys there, whatever company it might be? And oftentimes employers are very willing to give you that information. And again, it builds that relationship. It makes a cold call into a warm call. So then when you call that employer in Burlington County, you can say, oh, I got your name from Jean at the Camden County Pep Boys. So you're kind of developing that relationship and beginning to hopefully have that employer's trust. And finally, just kind of getting out there and doing it. This was oftentimes one of the most difficult parts of the job for me in the beginning, but later became very rewarding, especially when you were getting some positive feedback from employers, some different references, resources. I would suggest using some of these resources. This middle one is a fact sheet, kind of what we just went over. So kind of in 1 or 2 pages, talks about it, our upcoming sessions, marketing on the 30th, and then developing and maintaining relationships with employers. Certainly are standalone, but it's kind of going to be a nice flow. If you have any questions and answers, I know Kati is putting the link for the survey in the chat. So we appreciate you taking the time to fill out the survey. We have just about a minute to answer any questions. Again, please
Thank you, Joni. So
contact me if you have any questions about the content, and we appreciate your time.
So at this moment, I will stop the recording so that people can feel free to share any questions they might have.